So, hello and welcome to another Times Rated Frontline recap. I'm Philip Ingram. I currently present Times Rated Frontline. I'm a former senior British military intelligence officer, NATO planner, and commentator on all matters geopolitics, defence, cybersecurity, terrorism, and anything else that people ask me to comment on. So, getting straight into it today, Steve Wickoff has been in Moscow for a meeting with Vladimir Putin. Now, the Russians, as we record this, have released a statement to say that the talks were very constructive. Surprise, surprise, they always do that. But they haven't put any real substance in it. Of course, Steve Wickoff is not a diplomat. And Vladimir Putin's team are very experienced at manipulating diplomats. They will manipulate Wickoff. Wickoff at the moment has not released a statement because he hasn't spoken, from what I understand, to Donald Trump. However, I'm not expecting anything serious to come out of these talks, apart from the Russians potentially trying to set the conditions to delay Donald Trump from imposing his tariffs on Russia and secondary tariffs on those countries that are buying goods from Russia. Donald Trump's been backed into a corner by this meeting, and what Putin will have said, we just have to see how tight he's been backed in. Donald Trump's meeting through Wickoff with Putin has backed Putin into a corner. One of them has to give. Let's see who it is.
It was quite a useful and constructive discussion when it comes to its topics. First of all, it was the Ukraine crisis, and the second topic were prospects of possible development of strategic cooperation between the US and Russia. On our part, in particular on the Ukrainian issue, some signals were transmitted. Corresponding signals were also received from President Trump. The situation now is that our president, Putin, possesses full information, including both our signals and the signals from Trump, while Trump has not yet been told about the results of this meeting. So I would refrain from more detailed comments. Let's see when Special Envoy Steve Wickoff will be able to report to Trump on today's conversation. After that, we'll be able to complement these comments of mine with something more substantial.
So I want to point you out 3 interviews this week. The first one is with Ryan Ramsey. Now, Ryan was a former commander of a British nuclear-powered attack submarine, and we go into the detail about what Donald Trump said with regard to the movement of 2 submarines, and get to understand that, and understand the tactics that he's used as a nuclear submarine commander, and explore just how good the Russians really are. We also look at the implications of the Ukrainian cyber attack that has managed to access the plans of new Russian nuclear submarines, the details of how they operate, down to crew numbers and all the rest of it, and the implications that that would cause for a submarine commander that was out at sea. And Ryan was very clear in this. He said it would be almost catastrophic, and he would be extremely concerned. Good interview, gives good technical detail about submarine operations. Commend it to you enormously.
I thought a lot about this, as I do for most of Donald Trump's sentences when he speaks, because you never know where it's going to go or what effect he's actually trying to have with that. I thought it was a bold statement in the fact that telling anybody what you're doing with submarines, people don't normally do that. It's a clandestine force for every nation. It's gathering intelligence, it's doing all those kind of things. Then, of course, there's a strategic deterrent, which is the last line of defense for any nation that has it. So I think what he did by saying he was sending 2 submarines, it could have been more submarines or whatever it was. He was very specific about the numbers, but it means that the Russians now have to think about where they divert forces to detect these. So within the Russian HQ or the maritime headquarters, I'd be certain there'd be a lot of people wondering, what is the intent of those submarines and what do we need to do to retain tactical control.
So this was, a good bit of messaging in the same way that, he did exactly the same in 2017 with North Korea just before he went to see Kim Jong-un. But also, we did it in the run up to the Falklands, or during the Falklands War, before we actually got, or maybe we already had, a nuclear-powered boat down in the South Atlantic. But certainly that caused the Argentinians something to think about. So the use of submarines and talking about it is as much an information operation for positivity. And do you think that's what he's been doing here?
Yeah, I do, because the reality is he doesn't even have to send those submarines off. He like you said, like we did in the Falklands. We've said there was something down there that changed the way that the Argentinians operated, and this may change the way the Russians operate.
Okay, but so the Russians have now increased their readiness and they're out looking hard for submarines. But you've been in the commander seat. What are the sort of risks and challenges on crews when you're out in a mission like that, knowing that all of a sudden those forces that you're trying to keep hidden from are being more active and proactive in trying to find you? And how do you balance the need for aggressive positioning with a sort of imperative to remain undetected, especially when you're getting into the likes of supposedly the capable Russian forces and supposedly the capable Chinese forces?
Yeah, so it is really tough as a captain in those kind of patrols. And I can't talk about specifics, but generally there's a piece about remaining. If you get detected, it's got political consequences, and that's a real problem. So the aim, the objective is, you might have some intelligence you want to gather. That's one part of it, but avoiding counter detection and remaining safe become the focus. And it's this really tight balance for any captain in those circumstances, because you might have to go miles and miles away from where you need to be, and therefore you're not achieving your aim, but you are avoiding counter detection. And how you justify these decisions, because every decision that you make is looked at and analyzed when you get back, and you need to be able to justify those. So it's exciting for those captains, without a doubt. You're at the front line, things are happening, you don't know what's going to happen next. The political context is everything as well. Really, really exciting. But that'll be in the back of their minds, the crew, the decisions they're making, the analysis that's going to happen afterwards.
Yeah, and again, so to get your understanding, for those that are listening, what sort of length of time on a nuclear powered attack boat are you going to be out in the patrol?
So if I take my final deployment, was 286 days away from the UK. So we sailed in February and came back in December, of which we did quite a few patrols. The longest patrol I've ever done was 99 days. In general, you might, for those kind of patrols, it's 60 days. But you're also seeing the strategic missile submarines going out for over 200 days at the moment, which is insanely long to do those. So it is really tiring, as you can imagine. 60 days. The team are in a watch cycle of 6 hours on, 6 hours off continuously. The captain doesn't sit in that watch cycle because he or she might be needed immediately. But yeah, it's exceptionally busy.
Yeah, now I know the nuclear armed boats will spend their whole time under the sea, but is that 60 days? You're submerged for the whole of the 60 days, or
Yeah, definitely. So those are submerged. So I mean, if you look at that 286-day deployment, 237 days of that 286-day deployment were underwater, effectively, not in one go.
crikey, wow! Now we're seeing the Russians conduct their own significant naval exercises. They've just finished a big one that's brought a number of their fleets together, apart from the Black Sea Fleet, and they've coordinated that. We'll talk the Black Sea Fleet in a moment, but do you think these are pre-planned drills? Are they real-time naval response to the increasing NATO posture? Do the Russians have capabilities that they're trying to demonstrate by way of their information operations against us, and are they as good or as bad as people think?
So they do these exercises regularly, and they're definitely a demonstration of force as opposed to tactical. Them creating their own tactics and everything else. Is showing the world exactly what they can do and the capability they have. So you see them firing lots of missiles and depth charges and all kinds of stuff just to prove that they've got this capability. Whether they're good at what they do is another question. I know in the UK we have a tendency to overrate a lot of people's capabilities. I was fortunate enough to meet my adversary in 2009, who's captain of one of the Russian kilos, and I was pleased to say he was just like me. So we had this vision of some Ramius out of Hunt for Red October, and actually he wasn't Ramius from Hunt for Red October, but just a standard submarine captain, just as I was then. So yeah, I think we tend to overrate their capability. However, that said, the two newest submarines, the Yasin class and also the Bore class, are exceptionally capable. They often put videos out on YouTube of the inside of these things. And I spend most of my time, my free time, sadly, looking at these videos to work out whether their capability is better or has improved than in the past, and it is definitely improving.
And how they integrate and all the rest of it. The latest Russian nuclear submarine, Ukrainians seem to have pulled off a real coup by hacking in and getting the plans and publishing them out onto different websites, revealing sort of potential vulnerabilities and all the rest of it. And all this comes at a time when Moscow, you say the focus might shift to the Pacific, but Moscow's also increasing its capability in the Arctic. And I suppose the trade routes through the Arctic connect Atlantic Pacific and are going to be critical to all of this. How significant is that sort of leak and that hack from a submariner's perspective? If you were going to command one of these new boats, would you be concerned that people have got an advantage now in trying to find you?
Yeah, I'd be slightly horrified by that, to be honest, because if the enemy already knows my acoustic signature and they've not had to come in, I've just lost one major advantage that goes with it. The only thing that plays against that is the fact that sonar technology now, I mean, submarines are so quiet now that sonar technology is struggling to keep up. And so actually it's all about using other methods in order to detect submarines. And interestingly, I mean, I've operated under the Arctic, under the North Pole and beyond, and that is a really harsh environment. So any advantage that you can get from intelligence like that gives you a huge advantage in that particular area.
We've got a bit of a naval theme this week. Second interview I want to point you towards is with former Admiral Chris Parry. Now, Chris is talking about whether the Russians would come and help the Chinese if the Chinese decided to invade Taiwan. And his conclusion was yes, but not helping in a military way, helping distract the West as Russia's doing at the moment. And therefore that distraction may include military activity in the region to try and keep any forces that would be supporting Taiwan focused on multiple different areas and have difficulty in concentrating in dealing with the Chinese. We're certainly seeing an increased level of cooperation between the Chinese and the Russians, but they've got a long way to go before they can start to operate in an integral way in the same way NATO nations do or other cooperative partners do, like the ones that are exercising with HMS Prince of Wales, the UK aircraft carrier group that's currently down in Southeast Asia. So I commend Chris Parry's interview to you. That's a good one.
It's almost certain the Russians would assist the Chinese, not in direct operations against Taiwan or any other target, but they would certainly, I think, take up space and take up the marking capability of the free world, and particularly the United States. They provide intelligence. They get in the way, basically, and you wouldn't know what they were going to do. I mean, I suspect that if we deployed forces, we, the free world, deployed forces to deal with that, either in terms of deterrence or confrontation, you'd find Russian naval forces getting in the way. You'd certainly find their submarines in attendance, trying to stay close to American carriers. I mean, significantly underwater, the Russians are a lot better than the Chinese. I mean, most Chinese submarines you can hear from a long way away. It sounds like a box of spanners underwater. And so Russian submarines will bring a distinct advantage in terms of surveillance and marking of free world forces in that respect. So, yeah, I would expect to see quite significant cooperation below the level of engagement by the Russians in support of the Chinese in those circumstances.
And we talk about where Russia gets its support from on the world stage. We've heard more out of the White House in recent days. White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller saying it's not acceptable for India to buy Russian oil. That's as part of this ongoing pressure the US is putting on India over its purchasing of Russian energy resources. Is this the right approach to take, and why put this pressure on India but seemingly not the same level of pressure on China, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think China's got quite a lot of sources of supply. For example, 48% of its energy needs come from Iran. So it's not quite as dependent as India is. Now, we have to be quite clear. India is getting its energy from Russia at a considerable knockdown price. It's not only using it for its own industry, it's also reselling it and making a profit on it. So understandably, the Americans aren't very happy with that. India has got to make a choice. At the moment, it's trying to sit on the fence. Does it run with the Eurasian autocrats, or does it come towards the maritime democracies? Well, its grand strategy suggests, with its rivalry with China, that it instinctively should come to the maritime democracies. But the fact of life is, in sitting on the fence, it serves the purposes of Russia and China, and to a lesser extent in Iran as well, pretty well. And so I think what the Americans are saying is, look, you're making a killing out of this in terms of all this sort of cut price oil, particularly you're getting. That's got to come to an end, because there are no penalties for Russia if they can continue to export to you like that. So with the prospect of these so-called secondary sanctions coming on, India has to be put in the crosshairs of any regime in the United States that wants to actually deal with that.
And we've also heard that the de facto Russia envoy Steve Wickoff will head to Russia in the coming days. Is there any sign that you can see that Russia wants a ceasefire ahead of Trump's recent deadline?
I don't think so. I think the Russians will do what they normally do. They try and brazen it out. They'll think, even at this late stage, they'll think that Trump is huffing and puffing. But they should take note of what happened during President Trump's last ultimatum to Iran. He said, within a certain time, I'm going to take some action. And the next thing he knew, there were B-2 bombers bombing Iranian nuclear sites. I don't think we're going to get direct military action. But one of the big advantages that America has with President Trump is he's perceived to be unpredictable. And the last thing the Russians want is unpredictability. They need to be able to tell their own people a narrative. They need to keep projecting onto the world stage. They also need not to drag their partners in. China will not want to be dragged into an argument with the United States, given the market pressures that China is under right now. So China will be saying to Russia, play it long, and Russia will be trying to do that. I suspect that President Trump will impose secondary sanctions. He doesn't like being thwarted. He made a great play of bringing Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table. And if he doesn't get results, if he doesn't get a deal, he's going to be very disappointed. And in the past, that disappointment has led to decisive action. So I think the Russians probably need to sit up and take notice, unless they're going to really brazen this out. I mean, their economy is shaky, there's no question. And if President Trump manages, through his secondary sanctions, to lower the oil price significantly, there's no way that Russia can continue the war the way they are at the moment, and indeed continue their military build-up. I mean, the concern from the American side, I think, is that in response, Russia will lash out, not at the United States, but at somebody else, which is important to the United States. Or indeed, they'll step up these grey zone hybrid activities against America's allies, particularly in Europe.
The final interview is me with Ian Williams. Now, Ian is a China expert, and we explore that relationship that there is between Russia and China. And in particular, the bit that we have here is Ian talking about the fact that China originally relied on a lot of help from Russia with its equipment, with its tactics and everything else. But China has changed. It's moved beyond that and is now not reliant on Russia. Russia is now wholly reliant on China and support from China. And the Chinese are observing what Russia is doing in Ukraine and learning the real lessons from that.
China is trying to present its economy at the moment as being quite resilient, as being technologically close to, if not surpassing, the United States in many ways. It's trying to big up the state of its economy. I think that a lot of that is deception. I think there's a lot that's quite Potemkin about the way China is presenting its technological prowess at the moment. That's not to dismiss the achievements they've made, but I do question just how sustainable they are, and whether that does mean that China has created a sort of innovation-driven economy which is self-sustaining. But on the Russian side, clearly it's useful to Russia, to China, to have access to raw materials, minerals, oil, gas at well below market prices, and they have struck very good deals from a Chinese perspective with the Russians in order to get access to this. I think that China benefits in numerous ways from this relationship, from the fact that it makes China immensely the stronger partner, because Russia is very, very dependent upon China. In fact, I would go far as say, I mean, China is underwriting the Ukraine war, and Russia would not be able to sustain that war without the support of China. And I think, as China has hinted in talks, in fact, with the EU, they don't want to see Russia defeated.
Yes.
Interpret that as you will, but one way of looking at that is it does suit Beijing rather well to have America, to have Europe engaged in this conflict within Europe, because it distracts attention away from the Pacific, and it distracts attention away from anything that China might choose to do around Taiwan. So it does benefit Beijing to have Trump, to have Brussels, to have London distracted in this way.
The People's Liberation Army was very much equipped with, in the early days, Soviet-style equipment. And it's in a big remodernization program, but a lot of the redesigns are based on the old Soviet designs. And given the very poor performance of the Russian kit in Ukraine, do you think the People's Liberation Army are concerned, which is why, and do you think they're using the opportunities with the relationship with Russia to beta test their own designs on the front line against Ukraine just to see how it performs?
I think there's an element of that. I mean, there was the period after the collapse of the Soviet Union, amid the chaos in Russia in the early 90s. The Chinese took huge advantage of that in terms of buying up Russian know-how, importing Russian experts, all manner of espionage. I mean, they were there plundering, picking away at the carcass of the former Soviet Union in terms of whatever expertise and military know-how they could get their hands on. And of course, China now has a very strong indigenous arms industry, which is not so reliant. They still buy a lot of kit from Russia, but it's not nearly as reliant as it used to be. But yes, they're very keen to see the way this kit performs in action. I mean, they'll be pouring all over the India-Pakistan scrap recently, because to see the performance of Russian missiles and aircraft in that conflict. But in a sense, that the Ukraine conflict provides an even broader test bed for weaponry which the PLA either has or has taken and redeveloped, redesigned, and scaled up, improved for its own purposes.
So our final piece today is President Zelensky doing what any good commander should do and visiting his frontline troops. Zelensky is showing real leadership. He frequently goes to the front line. He not only meets the troops on the front line, but he then goes and meets the troops that have paid a sacrifice for what they've done and are wounded and in hospital. And the imagery that goes out is a clear morale boost for the Ukrainian troops that are there. You know, we get world leaders visiting Zelensky, which gives him the same sort of boost. It's important that no matter how tied up President Zelensky gets with looking at the strategic stuff, working onto the world stage, he has to recognise that the people that are fighting on a daily basis are the ones that are keeping Ukraine as a country as safe as they can be, and are the ones that are stopping the Russians moving further forward. So well done, President Zelensky. That's the end of Recap this week. I commend all the videos that we've done on Frontline. Please go and find us on YouTube, or you can get us now on our on your favourite podcast channel. Just search for Times Radio Frontline. I'm Philip Ingram. Thank you. Goodbye.